You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Colleen Ryan-Hensley. Colleen is a Navy veteran, sexual assault survivor, mental health expert, and founder of Binging Sober, a rewards-based system that enables people to develop steps, habits, and beliefs that impact their vitality. She is a candidate for Certified Mental Performance Coach with the Association for Applied Sports Psychology and founder of Grace C. Ryan Performance. She holds an advanced degree in performance psychology and spent 5 years with the team of cutting-edge researchers and clinicians at the University of Texas at Dallas' Center for BrainHealth, teaching high-performance cognitive training to military veterans and their spouses and caregivers, active duty military, and first responders around the country. As an advocate for veteran wellness, she received a fellowship with the Mission Continues and lobbied for veteran rights on Capitol Hill, alongside her team at Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. She's been featured on Fox and Friends, PBS, and various local Dallas media, including WFAA. Colleen struggled with depression, alcohol abuse, and intermittent suicidal thoughts for over 20 years before she tamed her brain and turned her fight into her greatest asset. She champions for proactive mental health and optimal wellness from a place of knowing the ways in which living with depression can be an extraordinarily rich experience when you know how to do it. All right, so I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation. Colleen shares a bit about her overwhelmingly positive experience in the Navy, surviving sexual assault, and the years of healing she's done since retiring from the service. She also talks about how she developed Binging Sober, what it means to define sober, redefining mental toughness, and how you can apply what she's learned and all of this knowledge that she has and apply it to your life. All right? So sit tight. Here's Colleen. Hey, Colleen. So nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
It's so nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You have a very just compelling bio and story. And like that was a no-brainer for me to just say, yes, let's get into this. I want to start with why the Navy? Why go to the Navy? Why do that?
I grew up on my grandfather's sea stories
of
World War II and Korea. So all about war. Yes, he was at war, but what I heard about was mostly the travel, his shipmates, his friends, all of these funny, exciting stories. So from a very, very young age, I had my sights set on the Navy and ships in particular.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And I'm gonna push you one step further.
Sure.
Hearing all those things and being inspired by them is one thing, but actually signing up is like a whole other thing. Like,
right.
Was that easy? Like, were you scared? What was going through your mind?
It eventually became easy. I didn't rush it right after high school. I really, explored some other options, did some traveling, hung out with friends. There was just a point where I knew I was ready. I was in college full time, just basic like undergrad stuff. I was working full time just in retail. And just one day I was sitting at my job and I just had a pause, like this moment of, oh my gosh, it's time to join the Navy. It was literally that clear because
Wow.
I just felt like uninspired and just kind of going through the motions. I was 21 at the time, and it was just time. And so I really think I did a lot to prepare myself mentally and
Mm,
physically to do it to where it became not scary.
got it. Was
Yeah.
your family generally supportive?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Very supportive.
Okay.
Mhm.
And your experience then, you know, in the service, I'm sure that's like, 4 hours worth of conversation, but like,
Longer, probably.
right, like summarized, I guess, generally speaking, what
Mm.
would you say your experience was like? I mean, you were in a long time.
I was in almost 11 years. Bottom line, it was, I mean, I can't, there's nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
It was wonderful in of itself, just being a part of that kind of team and that kind of mission oriented, service oriented environment. Of course, there were challenges, but for the most part, it was fantastic. I mean, ask anybody who's been in the military and the friends that you have and like the family friends that you create while you're in are just bar none because
Mhm.
it's very different when you trust someone that much with your
Mm.
life in that kind of environment. I was trained technically as a computer network technician for Aegis destroyers. So I pretty much took care of the making sure that the computer network systems that tied all of the weapon systems together was
Wow.
always working. So, it's kind of a almost morbid kind of a technical job. So it really wasn't a passion that I wanted to stick with beyond that 10 years. But it was such a specialized position that I couldn't get out of it.
Interesting.
So that's why I ended up pursuing passions outside.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. How did you get into it then to begin with?
Into the technical
Yeah.
field.
Yeah.
It was just testing, like you take tests on your way in and they recommend different
Oh, okay.
paths. And so it was really interesting while I was in.
Mm.
It's just not something I wanted to necessarily continue. I
Okay.
also I created wellness programs while I was in. I was a
Oh,
career
cool.
counselor um and fitness leader, and that's the kind of stuff that really set me on the path that I'm
Oh,
on.
very cool. Okay. Okay. And I mean, this isn't probably an entirely interesting question to you, but I'm just curious. But um, you know, I went to school in DC, and so I was around a lot of military,
Sure.
mostly military guys.
Yes.
And you know, even as a civilian, it was pretty easy to tell which service they were in
Yes.
after meeting
Mhm.
them. Like, is that true for you? Is that like a real
Yes.
thing? Yeah.
I think that's pretty true for all of us.
Yeah.
And we all kind of guess when we meet another one, and then you're either proven right or wrong, and we're typically right about each other, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about like the Navy as being like the characteristics, or if we're gonna like grossly generalize and overly stereotype
Ooh.
sailors? Like what is it?
Ooh, why don't you tell me? I mean, I have I always say, when it comes to sailors, and people are like, no. But what do you like? I want to turn that question back on you
Oh
because if
God.
I tell you, like,
Yeah.
because I can say I could the drunken sailor,
Yeah.
the womanizer, like that kind of thing. Typically well traveled, just that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's funny. And there was always like this competitive, like, who's like the softest of, or who's like the most like combat ready, and like all like the toughness of, and these are just dudes, I'm sure, being dudes too on top of it. But like, yeah, I don't know. You could always tell the Marines
Yeah,
in particular, nobody was as fierce as they are. Like it, like all those
it's
things.
true.
Anyway.
It's true. And actually, the girls in the Navy have a kind of a joke. Any Marine who's listening may have heard this, and then the Navy guys will get angry a little bit, I think. But we always say that the Marines are the men's department of the Navy.
um
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah, my this isn't related either, but my like one of my first like real relationships was
during that time, and it was with a Navy guy, and it was just funny. Like
How you know?
it's like a whole other
Mm-hmm.
like culture. It's a whole other world. It's a whole
Yeah.
other like social system. Like
Yes.
everything is different, and they all kind of understand it, and like
Yeah.
to come into it is hard. But anyway, um, anything about your experience as a woman in that environment worth sharing, repeating?
I mean, I'm sure tons that we can pull out. There was, an experience in particular that you may have on your notes there,
Mm-hmm.
that happened in my 20s because, for me, because of this environment with excess alcohol just everywhere, you lose a lot of awareness and control around that stuff. And so, without getting too much into that now, unless you want to ask about it later, I'm totally an open book about
You
it.
can share it now if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, trigger warning for anyone out there who's, experienced any kind of trauma around sexual assault, but I was assaulted in my early 20s. And when I joined the military, I embraced this mental toughness, this stoicism of the environment. I was ready. I prepared myself a lot to deal with this kind of stuff, not the assault in particular,
Right.
but just like the environment,
Mm-hmm.
and how I really embrace this idea of what we consider mental toughness right now. And so after it happened that next day, I took the blame. Like I just took all the responsibility for it. I didn't report it.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up facing the guys that were at the party the next time that I saw them, and told them to forget about it, just like I would.
Hmm.
And I did. I repressed it for 15 years.
Wow.
But why that isn't like really a point to make for your question, like what's, what I became after that. And of course, in my 20s, not a lot of self-awareness, not really like present and paying attention to this. What happened was I just put up a very thick wall.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I was very assertive, like extremely assertive. Whereas beforehand, I was very happy-go-lucky and really positive and, giggly and stuff that can really be misinterpreted, unfortunately, in that culture. And so I really made sure that people understood right away, like my boundaries after that. And I'm not sure if that would have happened. Of course, that's making light of a terrible situation, but I really let that change the trajectory of my career because of that experience and the way that I became hardened by it.
Mm-hmm. Do you wish you had done that differently now in hindsight, looking back? Like, do you wish you had reported it? Do you wish you had had other conversations, or are you like solid in how it played out? Because I think both are valid.
Yeah, Stas, I keep getting asked that question, and I don't know that I would have done anything differently, because I know of a lot of other situations within my time in service where people's careers were destroyed. And this is a while ago. I do want to point out that this is in the early 2000s. Okay. So this is 21 years ago at this point. And I say that because things have definitely changed within the military since. They haven't gotten where they need to be, but they've definitely changed. Back then, people's careers were destroyed. The female or the male, whoever was assaulted included. Like my career would have been ended and destroyed. And it was, I loved my Navy service. I would have been brokenhearted if it was disrupted by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, was there a catalyst for, what is the word? Like whatever the opposite of repressing it is. Like, was there a catalyst for then like going
Uncovering
through it and healing and all of that?
Yeah. So when I got out of the military, which has been, I got out in 2010, so 13 years ago. I started seeing a therapist. Now I have a background in mental skills training even before the military, and more of like the strength-based perspective of human performance and that kind of stuff. So very positive approach to this kind of thing. And when I got out of the military, I started seeing a licensed professional counselor, but someone who was a life coach. Like it's funny because I was ready to do some work. I was really, looking forward to, personal growth outside of this strict environment that I had lived in.
Mm-hmm.
And I really needed like direction and goal setting and that kind of stuff, because all the structure goes completely away,
Yeah.
So, that was the life coaching that I, sought to do that work. And it ended up, obviously, I started peeling away the layers and fell in love with therapy. I'm a huge advocate at this point. It wasn't until I met my now husband, who is also a Navy veteran, that I realized, I didn't meet him in the Navy, I met him afterwards, but how much healing I had to do beyond the surface level, what I thought. Like, I'd suffered from depression in my adolescence. And when I joined the military, I was able to just put that in a box. It was just this unfeeling environment, which like I told you, I completely embraced. Well, after that trauma, I became, looking back now, I can see I became heartless in the way I treated men. I couldn't get close to anyone. I, self-sabotaged every relationship that I had, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships. That trauma, the toxic energy doesn't go away. It sits there and destroys your life. So when I met my husband, I was like, okay, well, I can either do more work or I can lose this man forever. And I was really convinced that he was my guy. And so I did. I started to do more work and, went to therapy, around my childhood depression and my family of origin stuff, all that stuff that gets into therapy. And it ended up, I started having flashbacks and nightmares and night terrors of this like attack. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Like I started having these things that were destroying my day. And it took me a long time to tell my therapist because then I would have to say that I was a victim. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really the catalyst. And now I know it's because I felt safe outside of the military. Like that's one of the things that I learned as far as all of us, all humans, when there's something that we're experiencing that's traumatic, but you're still in that environment, your brain, your body, your everything might, hold on to that and cover it until you feel safe to explore it. And that's exactly what happened.
That's fascinating. I've never heard it said that way. And I think the example of, in service versus out, like is one that nobody can understand unless they do it, but they can understand it conceptually. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's, yeah, wow. Just seeing you on camera here and just like the way you talk and like your energy and your vibe, like it's hard for me, even just knowing you for 15 minutes, to picture you as heartless and cruel and
I'm glad. Thank you.
but like you just have like this sunny vibe, and it's amazing actually to think that there was like this whole other version of you, and it's really cool actually when you think about it. It's a testament to the work you've done and that people can grow, right?
Yeah. I think, I was on very small ships, 300, 350 people. And there were 2 ships that I was on. And there's a point to the story.
I like all the stories.
There's no such thing. I don't know if you're familiar with Phil Zimbardo. He did the Stanford prison experiment. That's like psychology 101. Anyway, so he's done a lot of work on, what creates, quote, bad people. And one of the things that he says is that there's no such thing as bad apples, only bad barrels. Like there's the environment. Well, I tell you that because I was on 2 ships. The first ship was the absolute just epitome of an unhealthy, toxic environment. And it, started at the top and it affected the entire crew. It affected the entire experience. Thank God I went to this other ship, and I'll shout out USS O'Kane and Captain William Nault because he's amazing. And the entire crew, like was so phenomenal. I mean, it was the best experience. If you ask anyone that was on that ship between like 03 and 06 when I was there, and then beyond, like right before that and right after that, they will tell you the same thing. Like, I know people who've been in the service for 30 plus years, and they're like, that was the best experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because like my sunny disposition was able to come out then during that time. Like, I was able to be myself in the environment, and I felt safe at that point.
Interesting.
So yes, it was like I was unconsciously able to turn on and off that unfeeling robot, like super tough person when I needed to make sure that my boundaries were clear.
Yeah.
But I was still able to be this person that you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, it's survival. It's coping strategies.
Yeah, for sure.
And we, I'm a newer mom, toddlers, and
Oh, congratulations.
thank you. And we talk on the show a lot about about inner child work and mostly as it relates to like parenting, right? Because these kids, they bring out every little wound that you've never healed. And
Yes.
my God. And I'm wondering now, thinking about your example of the barrels and the ships, you mentioned having depression as a child. Like, can you look back and say, I had a tough barrel? Or do you think that was just how you were born with, a tendency towards depression? And I only ask because we're always like, trying to figure this out of like the nature, nurture, and like.
It's a good question. Yeah. I mean, you really can't discount any variable, right? But in doing all the work that I've done since, and I've launched this program, and there's one really big like light bulb that came to me that I think hopefully will help a lot of people. And it's this. I'll answer your question first. I think that I have a kind of lower happiness set point, if you will. Like, I just feel that way.
Okay.
And we can unpack that for hours. But where I think that we've gone wrong as a society, and where I think we need to really question ourselves as our perspectives relate to society's perspective. A lot of my childhood depression, my adolescence, before I understood what it was, before anyone was having these conversations,
Right.
Seth, like
Right.
my parents didn't know it was wrong. I didn't know it was, and I'm quote wrong. Like,
right.
Nothing was wrong. It's just we have kind of an incomplete idea as a Western society of what the experience of life is. And if I was comparing my life at that point, not understanding what I was going through, to what I believed happiness was supposed to look like, a good family was supposed to look like all of these things were not necessarily my perception. It was society's that I was comparing it to that was making me feel bad and shameful and depressed.
Yeah.
Well, really, I've noticed over time that I am totally okay with being kind of low level. Like,
yeah.
when you're like
you.
my happy place is actually, like, if you consider a scale from -10 to +10 with 0 in the middle, at like a -1 or 2, hey, I'm cool.
You're chill.
I'm content. I'm
Yeah.
balanced. I'm cool. It's when you look at, Hollywood and alcohol commercials and glamorizing travel and wealth and blah, blah, blah. And you don't realize that, hey, like, if you can't achieve that,
right,
then that's, then that's a problem for you. If you're unconsciously living that way, that can create a lot of the depression and anxiety that we're seeing if you're not making that connection for yourself.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to your question, but that's seriously, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about those lifestyles that we see on social and on TV and things is like they're intentionally set up to not be attainable.
Yes. Yes.
So that we have to keep striving for them.
Or paying for whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's we're on the fringes of binging sober. Let's talk about that. We're like coming there. tell me about Binging Sober, what it is and how you created it.
Well, it's a process that I've used to manage my own mental health challenges for over a couple of decades. I was not necessarily aware that I was doing it at first. I've
Mhm.
really formalized the process in the past like 3 to 5 years. And this past January, I started to share it with people because I just felt like I really feel like this is something that maybe is missing, and hopefully it can help other people. So it's really a way of gaining awareness, balance, and control over our habits, over our routines, over these unhealthy, mind numbing escapism
Mm.
behaviors that have become so accessible in excess to all of us and so acceptable that
Mhm.
we rarely step back and question how it's truly impacting us in the moment, tomorrow, 3 days from now. A lot of us, you can tell, hey, I just drank 3 glasses of wine and right now I have a headache and my stomach hurts and blah, 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 and it's screwing up my sleep. But are we really paying attention to what that long-term impact is in a week,
Mm.
etc.?
Mhm.
So, right now, there's a learning management system being developed. The point system, because it's a tracking system, is really a way to make these abstract things like our time and our energy more calculable and objective,
Okay.
so that we're able to see able to identify for ourselves. It's a very tailored process for ourselves on that scale from -10 to 10 with that 0 in between. That balance is the goal.
Mm. Okay.
So it's really a way of doing exactly what we were just saying, like identifying what your own perspective of happiness, balance, content, all of those is, and you're able to track it using points to stay in that spot and give yourself a red flag if you're kind of tanking toward this, what we like to call, I say we collectively, this downward spiral that you hear a lot about in
Mhm.
like mental health and suicide statistics.
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
like, you're caught in a downward spiral. And this
Yeah.
is really about owning your own experience and owning the things that you can control in order to manage your own mental health.
Okay. Okay. And so I think we can quite obviously apply this to, the escapism with alcohol, but you're also talking about other things.
Yes. So sober, when it comes to hashtag binging sober, is the full definition in the dictionary sense.
Oh.
Part of it that we have adopted as a society is the absence of intoxication from alcohol and drugs specifically.
Mhm.
But I'm sure you've heard the term sober used in other ways. And
Mhm.
when we say something was a sobering experience, that means
Mhm.
that it's calm. It's maybe not, it's kind of um what's the word? Just content, or like this balanced kind of a state that
Mhm.
I discovered not only when I stopped drinking, which I do longer periods of sobriety like all the time when it comes to alcohol. Um, but once I got my drinking under control, because that's something I was struggling with before the Navy, I was using it to escape my depression. And it was making it worse. I think we can all agree with that at this point. We all know
The
that.
most vicious cycle.
It's horrible. And I was
It's
stuck
all
in,
you want to do, and it's the worst thing
yes,
for you.
worst thing you can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But when I was on the ships, I didn't have access to alcohol. So I started understanding what this clear-headedness was about, like this understanding of what it truly means to be sober. And I started to, when I was not on the ship but on land and post Navy, started to really crave that, like started to
Oh,
crave
interesting.
the
Yeah.
absence of the toxic. Well, once I got my alcohol under control, I noticed there were all of these other things,
Mm.
all of these other things that I was doing that a lot of us lean on, that were doing the same thing as alcohol does. I mean, researchers right now compare scrolling the internet to blackout drinking. Like it's that bad for us, you know? So, I mean, it's, it doesn't have to be, it's just the way that we're using it and the amounts that we're using them. And so the sober and binging sober is a lack of intoxication from any escapism that we're using to probably avoid other things, and definitely that are clouding our experience of real life.
Okay. And by those terms,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but we could even apply that to like excessively exercising
Yes.
or
Yes.
eating or I mean eating is
Yes.
kind of a more obvious one I guess, but like even activities and behaviors that are deemed quote unquote healthy and good for us, for
Yes.
doing them to the point of obsession or you know oh there's no other way to say it, escape other things,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
we're still not doing what we need to do.
Exactly, exactly. So in hashtag binging sober, they're all in the potentially toxic category. So there's the
Okay.
toxic stuff that is absolutely toxic in its nature, right?
Hmm.
And there's the potentially toxic. That's all the things we've been discussing apart from alcohol, like social media, like you just said, exercise, food, like these things aren't necessarily toxic. It's how we're using them, the amount that we're using them, and then how we're judging ourselves for
Yeah.
using them is like a huge aspect of it. And then there's natural escape, which is all of the good stuff that we, know about being out in nature, being with animals, reading, quilting, gardening, whatever. I mean, the thing is, if you take time to look at these three categories, the natural list is so much longer
Mm,
than, and they're infinite. It's infinite. It's just we've gotten away from using those more
yeah.
in our routines, especially since the pandemic. I feel
Yes.
like, our access to everything has changed. Our stress as a society has gone up. Like all of these things have impacted that.
Yeah. 100%. Um. All right. So I know there's a version of me that would have heard you talk about this and have pictured it to be like entirely impossible. So could you
Interesting.
and what I mean by that is let me explain that a little bit.
Okay.
Is that I think particularly in new motherhood and motherhood sort of overlapping new motherhood overlapping with the pandemic and all of that, getting through a day was enough for me,
Yes. Oh
right?
yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is to do this really well, to do what you're saying really well, and we're at that balance place is like goals, right?
Mhm.
Bridge the gap for me for someone hearing this for the first time and knowing that they've been questioning their relationship with alcohol, knowing they sit around and scroll, like
Yeah.
knowing that most of us are doing all these things. And now, like, the panic sirens are going off, like, oh my gosh, I'm really not doing right by myself. But I have
Yeah.
no idea where to start. Like,
Yeah.
talk us off a ledge a little.
I
like,
love that.
like, how
And
do we start? And
yeah.
let's let's make it bite sized for a moment
Okay.
and like you know what I'm saying, like I feel
Yeah.
like there's I don't know, maybe that's just me.
No,
'Cause
I understand what you're saying because this is a practice that I've developed over so many years.
Mhm.
And you said one thing that stuck out there. You said, "How do I do this really well?" Well, it doesn't have to be done really well. It's an ongoing practice, and it's something that you can leave and come back to and leave and come back to in the moment,
Interesting,
in
yeah.
the day, in
Mhm.
the week, whenever you feel compelled to. I think it's really these concepts that can make the difference. And what that looks like is really just slow and intentional learning. It's not like here's a pill and take it and it's going to make you happy. Like that's not what this is about. And as a matter of fact, that happy thing, I am not a big fan of that word. And we've gone over that and we've gone over that. And that's why. It's because happiness needs to be defined by you. And I think if there's one place to start, that's it. Like
Mm,
what does that mean? If you're hung up on this thing, this unattainable, if it feels unattainable to be happy, then please do some looking at what happiness means to you,
mhm.
because it could be that you're living by an expectation that's not even yours.
Yeah.
And when we are so engrossed in all of these things, we're completely disconnected from ourselves, from each other. Isolation and loneliness are so just out of control right now. And when we have become friends with Netflix, we're going the wrong way. And so, I mean, it can be as simple as, again, redefining what it means to be happy for yourself. But then also one of the like, and this may seem unrelated, but going out and just going somewhere in public and talking to a stranger, just like, do you know, like social connection is something that is making all of this and that panic that you were just mentioning worse. Because we're all trying to like do this alone, and we're all like, we've all got sucked into our own little world, and it's turning that habitual escape into a more conscious escape. Because I'm not saying don't escape. We all want to escape. Escape is natural, but it's a matter of how we're using it and doing it that makes the difference.
Yes. I think as you mentioned, the pandemic just really escalated all of the isolation. And I speak for myself, it was a physical isolation that turned into to be a more comfortable place. And then having to get out of it has been a process. And I have never identified as a shy person, as a person like all those memes that you see about like, no, I'd rather not go. I'll be home reading my book. Like, I never identified as that person. I'm always out and about. I was a bartender.
Oh my gosh.
I was just like that person. And since all of this, it's been I have to talk myself through answering text messages and like wanting to even send a text message. Like, it's wild to me that is.
I talked to a lot of people who are going through it, and
where
I
we're
think
at. Yeah.
and I think that this the pandemic is over kind of mindset is a mistake. Like, we need to treat it, like you said, as a process.
And you know what, the one thing I jotted down as you were talking, as part of the kind of talking off the ledge idea, is that this is, as you know, the self-development therapy world would say, this system is one of the tools in the toolbox.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's something that I've always used in conjunction with professional. I mean, I've had a therapist forever. If you told me to quit therapy, I would no. Like, it's no. That's a no. Hard no. And it's my dream to make mental health care more of a proactive, preventative, accessible, thing that we all do. Like, it should just be the way, which is kind of the opposite of what we're, what we're taught and what we're living. We're getting there. But the feedback that I've gotten from the professional mental health community has been wonderful and really validating, in that you don't have to identify as having a quote problem to use this tool. I hope that it inspires people to do more, to heal more, to do more work, because when it comes down to it, that's what this really is about for me, is like redefining as a society what it means to be mentally tough, because right now it's only half baked and it's really standing in the way of a lot of healing. I think we can all agree by watching the news that tough guy doesn't work for us anymore. And that's what happened in my case. It was that mentally tough attitude that really stood in the way of healing for so long. And
I'm curious. I think I caught, and you correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
You're not full-time 100% sober with alcohol. You go
Correct.
through periods. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Months and years. Well, I like made this connection that I didn't want to feel that way. So a lot of times, like, because I'm very health conscious, and because I've learned that I liked the way that I felt, it was before all this research that now we're talking about cancer, and we're talking about all of these things that I'm sure will not be on the big stage anytime soon. It's like cigarettes. It's like cigarettes when the doctors used to smoke cigarettes. I mean, that's like where we are with alcohol.
People are saying that now. People are starting to say, like, is
Thank
alcohol
God.
Is alcohol the new cigarettes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we should have known that for a while. So, I used to abuse it, but then I had, made the connection in my very young brain that this is not good. Like the way that I feel, the way that I behave, those kinds of things, control that I lose. And so I would do these longer periods of sobriety. The reason why I sit here and say that I'm never going to, I wholeheartedly understand. I do not want, addiction is set aside right now. Like, please understand that what I'm saying is my personal experience,
Mhm.
and it works for me. Because I mean, you could think, if I drank 6 glasses of wine a night versus I drink, every 4 months I have a night where I have fun, I give you in quotes, I poison myself with fun. Like that. I mean, we could calculating that it's better for me. Is it the best? I don't know, but it's what works for me. And the way that if I would sit here and say that I'm never going to drink again, then all I would think about is the drinking. It's like the same with popcorn. If you tell me that I can't have popcorn, all I'm going to think about is the popcorn. Yeah. So I've gone, 9, 10 months, multiple times. I go weeks all of the time. I'm just really conscious and purposeful about how I use it.
Okay.
And that's where it makes the difference. And that's what binging sober is about with all of these things. It's turning habitual escapism into purposeful escape.
Okay. Curious. Okay. So I'm not, I read, last year, Quit Like a Woman or Quitting Like a Woman. Is that her name? Holly Whitaker. Is that her name?
Yeah. Quitting Like a Girl.
Something like that.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yep. And, it's very interesting. And I read it because I think like a lot of people, at least what I'm seeing online, and there is this curiosity. And I feel like left and right, you're seeing different influencers say, I haven't had a drink in a year or this or that. And, at least for me, it stemmed from getting into patterns that I'd never been in with alcohol before. Pre-pandemic, like at some point it was like, this is all we had to do and everyone was doing it, so there we go. And I got to a point where I was like,
wait a minute.
It was like, is this what I want to be doing? But I have to tell you, I don't see my life without it. But anytime I read something or hear a podcast of someone who went from curious to sober, they started that same way.
Yeah.
As not seeing their life without it, and now it's hard for them to imagine it with it. And I'm curious, like in your experience, it's like, if and how do you get over that hump? Do you know what I'm saying?
Which
like
hump?
The hump of how you go from can't imagine my life without it, don't want to give it up, but I'm curious, to then kind of being on the other side. I don't know.
Through experience. I can see how that could easily happen, because the way that this all started was experiencing the clear-headedness and the lightness. We're talking about poison here, people. So imagine not, especially if you're an everyday drinker, or especially if it's a very regular thing, your body, your brain has not experienced true, sobriety in a long time, because it takes 10 days ish to completely rid your body of alcohol. Wow. So that's why I always go longer, because I like getting past that 2 weeks. It feels amazing. So that's how I think it's pretty, I don't want to say, oh my gosh, I would never say easy for people, but I think that's how they get over the hump so quickly. Is that, or they come to make that connection, like, wait a minute, I definitely don't want this back in my life. Because they're just experiencing that same thing. There's a level of harmony and peace, and I keep saying, clear-headedness that comes from not having it. But
I hear that a lot.
Then take it to the next level when you're ridding yourself of these other unhealthy mind-numbing escapisms that you also may be leaning on, because that is also influencing your mindset, the way that you're operating, the way that you're living, your energy, your time, all of these things.
Okay.
So there's the alcohol, and then there's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
underneath of it, because I know a
Yeah.
lot of people that don't even like alcohol,
Yeah.
but there are other things that they could be leaning on, and typically they are.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm.
All right. So I just want to make sure I understand the full picture of the like point system.
Huh.
Um, is there anything more to it that you haven't said? Like, is there like how does someone actually gauge
It,
the system? Like, you know what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Oh yeah. It's so difficult to talk about right now, Sass. And the reason why is because when I was launching this in January, I was so excited to share it. And it's like I started with the community and created the lessons. I mean, this is something I've been using myself, so it's
Mhm.
so hard to articulate and share it in the best way. So that's what I've been doing since, figuring out the best way to share these things. Then I was gifted and blessed with, I'm getting an app and a learning management system well before I thought that was going to happen. And
Okay.
so that's all in development now. So it's really difficult to like explain it really well, because it'll become clear once you can actually do it. But imagine just gaining and taking away points once you become aware of and reflect on how these escapisms, the unhealthy mind numbing stuff, and the escapes, because we're talking about the positive too, like you're gonna give yourself points. Like, how does this truly impact me? How do I feel after binge watching TV for 3 hours yesterday? How am I feeling today? So it's really, I mean, the foundation is awareness, one could argue, with any personal growth.
Yeah.
But then that's not enough. Then it's about like application of the wisdom that you gain from these things. So yeah, it's like I said, it's an ongoing process. In the end, you have a tailored points tracking system that, as long as you're like entering what you're doing, which you don't have to every day. I mean, you could focus on one specific thing, like how is television impacting me, and then do that for a few months and track it over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just theoretically, like the app would be a way to check in and track.
Yes. And you'll have your own little scale showing you, like we had talked about, like what I realized, what my big aha moment was, that I'm quote happiest or my most content at like a -1 on this
Right.
scale.
Okay.
Which
Yeah,
if
no, I
you
get
would
it.
have
It makes
asked
sense.
20-year-old me, I
Right.
thought I'd had to be running around with a smile on my face to be
Right.
happy. And that's
Yeah.
not the case. So if you use the system, you'll gather that knowledge as well.
Okay.
And more importantly, I think, is the red zone, I'll call it, like
Okay.
that red zone, the downward spiral. At what point in your routines are you like brushing against that quote bad place?
Okay.
So you can stop that from happening as well, like kind of stop it in its tracks. Do
And
something,
then, right.
you gain points.
Okay, so that's what I was going to say. So once we see or feel that we are in kind of a red zone, we're going to do something that is on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. All right. I like that.
Yes.
Okay, and so one thing that I struggle with, and at my like core, I know that this is like just garbage, nonsense excuses, but I'm curious. I'm
Talk about yourself
curious
like that.
'cause I know it's just hard. So I have trouble making changes in my life that I know will have a ripple effect on my whole household.
Yeah.
And I think I fear more than it is a reality that it will be negatively received or have a negative impact. And like
Oh.
my like brain world, when I'm talking to someone like you, or I'm talking to my therapist, or I'm talking to a coach, they are like, hey, you logically know that when you do something that benefits you, it benefits your whole house.
Yeah.
It benefits your kids, it benefits your husband, the whole 9 yards. But just as like an example, it is our routine to spend time together during the week in front of the television.
Mhm.
And it there are nights where like I feel sometimes a pull in me that's like, maybe I want to read tonight, or maybe I want to this. And I am a person that like very much craves alone time. And most my family members are not that way. Like they're like, let's be together all the time. Isn't this great? And so I have this like fear of I'm picturing myself like using this system and going, okay, I really need to like do something from the opposite end of the spectrum, but going, that's gonna like disrupt our whole flow that we normally have. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious if you've experienced this in your own life. Like, how do you really what I'm getting at is like it feels like so hard to just like put myself first all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
you're a new mom,
I
so
know. I know. I
welcome.
know.
I went from single sailor to full-time stepmom of 3.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I understand everything that you're like saying and going through with all of that. And there's
Yeah.
like, you know, I mean, you said a lot right there.
I know. I've
Um,
babbled.
First of all, no, but first you said fear. And have you ever heard of fear setting? It's a great like mental skills
No,
um
I have not.
tool. So look up fear setting. And what
Okay.
it is really, so right now you're just feeling this like anxiety, this fear, but you haven't made it tangible. Like I
Mm,
say that because you need to get those thoughts out of your head. And fear setting, in a nutshell, is thinking about, okay, what's the worst that can absolutely happen? And a lot of times, the worst that could absolutely happen is not that scary.
yeah.
So it's getting it out of your head and making it like, oh, when we're knocking stuff around in our heads, we tend to magnify, and it gets so huge it takes over. And so that's why talk therapy is so you get it out. That's why journaling, you're getting it out, and fear setting is a type of journaling because you're getting it out and looking at it, and it's not so big anymore. Like you're making it smaller, you're making it real sized, and you're making it manageable when you can get out of your head. So definitely that. But then when it comes to like family stuff, because I am the same way, I need a lot, I need my own time. And then you have the family, family routines, like you're saying. I'm going to tell you this, and I'm sorry, but you're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to communicate with your team.
I know.
And maybe there's some, just trying it for one night, or maybe even having them do something, of the natural escape side of the spectrum with you. I keep hearing a lot from my clients and just like society in general, like time is moving quickly. Time is moving so fast right now. Well, it's because we're distracted from the natural pace of the world, using all of these things that have pulled our attention away from the natural pace of the world. But, I hear people my age specifically, I grew up outside. I didn't have a cell phone until I was 21. And, I had a Nintendo, but I would rather be outside. And so, I hear parents of my peers that are parents say, well, I used to, play until dark. And I'm like, well, when's the last time you took your child outside to play until dark?
I know.
Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just feel like there's a modeling aspect that as parents, we need to be paying attention to that too. And they need to, again, like this sober state, this lack of intoxication, this real life, this like really peaceful, harmonious, calm pace that we feel when we're connected to the natural way of the world, the natural pace of the world. You need to like disconnect from all of that stuff that's distracting us in order to feel it. And so as a parent being like, hey, we're going to go play outside today, we're going to go read together, like that kind of stuff that kind of goes away when the children get older, needs to be put back in the spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a lot there. I like the fear setting thing because like just using my example of our routine being like TV and maybe not wanting to watch TV, it's like the worst thing that could happen is that my husband gets his feelings hurt that I don't want to spend time with him, which is like a
Well, there's
pretty
that
easy,
aspect too.
yeah, but it's like a pretty manageable
Yeah.
fix
Yeah.
because I can offer another time we can spend time together, or we can split the difference. I can read for half an hour and
Yeah.
then we can watch TV for half an hour.
Yeah.
There are solutions, and I think that like as soon as you said like worst case scenario, it's like, yeah, Christy, like reading one night instead of watching TV is like a pretty manageable problem to have. You also said modeling, which it's just so good. It's so good, and it's what everything in parenting seems to come down to is
Yeah.
modeling. And you know, recently I have made a point of cutting the screen time for my kids, and um and it's because they are different without it, for the
Yeah.
better. We want to talk about modeling for our kids. It's almost like I'm actually seeing my kids modeling for me in that sense, because me cutting it off, me cutting the TV time down, the iPad time down significantly, they're different kids.
Yeah.
They don't fight as much, they don't whine as much, they get silly and like they make forts, and the house is a disaster, but they're laughing,
Yeah.
like they're having
Yeah.
fun. And it's it's like, yeah, it probably would be a big difference for adults too. Exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying. Like whether it's the screen or the whatever the other toxic things are. It's like
Potentially toxic. I mean, that's
potentially,
the
right.
thing. I mean,
Yeah, no, I
it's
appreciate
so
that.
hard to
Yeah.
like argue against technology. The things that we're doing with are just absolutely fascinating. We're connected to the entire world like we never were. Like
Yeah.
it's just a manager of it's just managing our own families, our own environments in a way that
Yeah.
makes it not toxic.
Yeah.
And so that's not turning it off completely. I mean, that's unrealistic.
Yeah,
It's
no.
being
I
more
can't.
realistic about it. And really, when these things, as I was saying with the point system, talking about it, you're like, it's just really abstract. So when you're able to put a number to it and calculate your own, it makes it more manageable. And it's not
Yeah.
as like, it's not totally abstinent based. Like that seems scary
Right.
when you're like, take the technology away from your kids, or turn off your own phone and don't touch it for the entire day. Like that's
Right.
just unrealistic. And it gives me a panic attack. Like
Right.
that's not what I'm saying here. It's just
Yeah.
finding that fine line. And the thing is, it can be such a fine line. And you need to do another reason it's challenging to articulate is that it's a new idea, and it's really so personal.
Yeah.
What works for someone or some family, and then what works for another someone and another family.
Yeah.
There's so many things that are involved that it's just a really challenging thing to do, but it's a matter of starting somewhere and just playing with it.
Yeah.
Getting curious about your own wellness, really.
Yeah. And it actually reminds me now of like you were saying with the fear setting. It's like taking it out of the abstract of,
Yeah.
hey, like they're like, yeah, because when I first start to realize, gosh, they're getting so much screen time and it's too much and it's like overwhelming.
Yeah.
But then similar to the fear setting where you're like, well, what is really happening here? Like, what
Yeah.
is the worst case scenario? And it's like the same thing. It's like, what is really happening? Let's start to actually track it and look at it and say, you know, it feels like they're getting too much, but what is their behavior like,
Yeah. And there's also things to manipulate within the escape arena. I say
Yes.
that because, like, let's say television. I love television. Okay. It's something I have to manage constantly because I just love it.
Yeah.
And I always have, even from, a child. But I do feel better. Like, I love horror TV. I can't watch it. Like, I just can't watch it. It doesn't make me feel good. But if I watch a documentary and learn something, and you can argue that for a child's brain as well, are they learning something? That's a very different scenario. Would you feel better if your child was watching something where they're learning versus just, for lack of a better word, garbage? Like,
Yeah, and just to stay with this example, there is so much trash TV for kids
yes.
out there. Like
And
there's
adults.
Well, yeah, but at least adults, like, for the most part, are making a choice. They're making a
Yeah.
I would like to think adults are making an informed decision. Like,
Yeah.
I love my housewives all day long. That is an escape for me. But
Yes.
it's not I'm not learning anything, you know? I'm just watching like rich women fight with each other and drink Pinot Grigio, and I love it. But for kids, it's different and it's hard. It's hard to
Yeah.
manage it now.
All of these different variables within the potentially
Yeah.
toxic
Yeah.
space that you can manipulate and make things less toxic. I mean, food's an easy one.
Yeah.
If I'm eating, and I'm not even going to say carrots or vegetables, if, there's so many different healthier whole foods options for the stuff that we crave and we love to snack on now. I mean, so many.
Yeah.
So many. So, if you want to eat a bag of chips, well, if they're baked, hey, that's like way better. Like there's just options within those potentially toxic escapes that you can tweak and make better decisions and make them less toxic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll say about that.
Okay. All right. All right, Colleen, is there anything either about your story or, what you are doing in this world that you want to make sure to say today or leave people with before we sign off here?
It takes, and I heard this recently, and that's why it's at top of mind, but it's to my mission of aiming to redefine mental toughness so that we as a society, as humans, embrace this other half of the spectrum of life and emotions and feelings that we tend to ignore that can't be ignored. Is that it takes an average of 26 years to heal from a trauma right now. That is an entire lifetime.
Yes.
Imagine if it were just the way that we lived life was to embrace the quote crap and embrace, yes, it's really important. I keep getting a lot of these questions about, well, what about resilience and about that part of mental toughness? Yes, resilience is very important in the face of stressful situations. That's where it comes in. But it's a matter of saying, especially if you're in like a job, an environment, any environment where you're exposed to stress a lot, then there's going to be residual toxic energy and you can't avoid it. I don't care if you think that you're avoiding it. It is unavoidable. It's not unavoidable. It's unavoidable. Like,
yeah.
So if it were just the way to go back and just own our own uncomfortable feelings that a lot of times we're running from unconsciously when we're leaning on these escapisms, then we wouldn't be called to escape so much because you would be comfortable through healing. And so that's just my plug, which I know is, your mission too, is to talk about where mental health care comes in. And I just want to do a big plug for proactive, preventative mental health care. And we're not there as a society yet, but guess what? We are well on our way and I'm so excited about it. And thank you so much for having these conversations because they're so important. And it's people like you that are going to, redefine mental toughness.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was excellent. I appreciate you. Yeah, this was I've got 2 pages of notes. Normally I don't have that many. So
that's fun.
And I've got a Google fear setting. I've got a lot of homework.
I love it.
Thank you, Colleen.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Seth.
All right. So, oh my goodness, I love when we get a new perspective on the show and cover a new area of life, if you will. I mean, we merely touched on her military experience. I wish we had more time to really get into it because I find it absolutely fascinating. For me, I think it's the combination of, as I mentioned on the show, spending a good amount of time socializing with military personnel in college. Also, I think being a millennial and experiencing 9/11 at the age that I did and the aftermath, everything from what was really happening to the, like great amount of songs that came out and all the things about the military at such an impressionable age to just being a civilian who can't possibly fathom the experience. Like I don't know, I want to know everything. So thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing your story. And the whole idea behind binging sober really makes me think. How about you? I mean, we talked about how our society has come to think about sobriety, and it is actually such an overwhelming concept to me that when I think about Colleen's binging sober, in order to bridge the gap from what I know to what she's talking about, I almost have to think of it as binging clarity or binging peace rather than sober, because sober and sobriety have such strong connotations for me. And so I think like just in the time since this interview, I've been thinking of it as binging peace and clarity, to hopefully one day getting to a point where I can think of sobriety the way that Colleen means it. It has definitely given me a lot to think about. I've also looked up fear setting, and this is a whole thing that I need to explore. I'm curious what you think about binging sober. How does it hit you? Have you looked up fear setting? It seems to me that this could help a lot of us with anxiety. All right, so I will link all of Colleen's resources in the show notes and all these websites and good stuff she gave us to look up. Thank you so much, Colleen, for sharing your story and being the advocate that you are. Thank you for listening, and I have another show coming out on Friday, and then next week I am launching a new category of episodes, so make sure you're subscribed to my email list to be the first in the know. You can do that at my website, says.com. That's all I've got. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.